Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss where Boris Johnson's Brexit deal plan has gone. Seems to be largely down the tubes. As well as another little wrinkle in the Benn Act, which is not fatal, but is not necessarily going to be as pleasing news as I thought it might have been yesterday. So before I get on to anything, if you find yourself enjoying the video, then please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. So what it seems is that Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings combo have shown themselves up as being fairly pleasingly useless again today. That is good. I'd rather terrible people were incompetent rather than what I'd call calculating evil. But as I say, there is a small, albeit hopefully benign sting in the tail at the end of the video. But getting on to the Brexit deal. So where the real danger with this was, because any Brexit deal Boris Johnson is able to bring to Parliament has to be fundamentally the same deal that Theresa May found. And that kept being defeated. But remember, the reason it was being defeated was due to various reasons, mostly political, not anything wrong with the deal itself. So all Boris Johnson has to do is to persuade people that a tweak in it is a fundamentally different deal and is a game changer, and maybe he can get it through. And bear in mind, there are absolutely some Labour MPs who will vote for any deal, no matter how bad, if it will go through. If it's a tight vote, they'll have to vote for it. And this is for fear of how it might play out in their own constituencies, especially with the looming general election, if they vote against it in the event of a tight vote, especially if it's narrowly defeated. Now, if the DUP and the ERG hardliners on the right wing of the politics, quite frankly, if they don't get on board, then those Labour MPs can just say it was impossible to get the deal through anyway, and they can safely vote against it. Now, in related news, Jeremy Corbyn has said that any Labour MPs that vote for Brexit will not be punished. So it will be down to individual MPs to vote as they wish, even though the whip will be deployed, but there'll be no punishment if you vote against it, so do what you like. But Boris Johnson still needs those hardliners on board because he's not going to get enough votes from Labour MPs. He will get a decent number, but not enough. Now, I've said before that as far as I'm concerned, getting a deal through Parliament would just be a ruse to get his no deal anyway, something he was clearly moving towards. As agreeing a deal now doesn't leave time to implement it by the end of the month. But the ERG and the DUP don't trust that Johnson's plan is effectively no deal. If they think he's really trying to get a deal, they do not like this deal. The DUP hate it because it splits off Northern Ireland from Great Britain, something they're dead set against. Quite frankly, Theresa May's deal was better for them. And the ERG won't like it because it's a deal. That means there would be a transition period, which means the full force of the tax avoidance measures will be online and affecting their ability to steal money from the public purse. Also bear in mind that as far back as July, or as recently as July, as however you want to look at it, Boris Johnson was saying he would absolutely never allow a border down the Irish Sea. And yet, that is what his plan is. His plan is Theresa May's withdrawal agreement. What's the only difference? The only difference is instead of having the border between the UK and the EU be within Ireland, it's outside of Ireland. But that means between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And it's not just politics, this minor change. To a lot of people, you might think, well, that sounds all right. That preserves the Good Friday Agreement and blah, 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 blah. But it's really bad for many people in Northern Ireland and people who trade with people in Northern Ireland, because you're talking about having a border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. That will disrupt trade almost as much as a no-deal Brexit for those who need to travel across that border. All right, not during the transition period, but after that, as soon as we start to diverge. It will mean checks are needed whilst travelling within the UK. And this deal moves us from our current position in the EU, where I can move around freely around pretty much most of Europe, to one where I can't even move around freely in my own country, the United Kingdom. And I know Priti Patel promised that she'd take away our rights to freedom of movement, but this is taking the piss. But the legal text, like the deadline, Boris Johnson was told the deadline was midnight last night and it hadn't emerged. And what was baffling me was like news outlets were still saying, oh, talk's still ongoing. It's like the deadline's passed. And they were still talking this morning. And it wasn't a false deadline. The reason this deadline was needed is because once Boris Johnson produces his legal text, his actual deal, not just talking in vague terms, but actually this is the thing that we want you to approve. Well, it has to be shared with other members of the EU Council. That doesn't just mean copying it. That means translating it, distributing it. It needs to be deliberated on. Although they all know that there's only one change in it, they need to make sure he hasn't put anything sneaky in anywhere else, like make Boris king of everything. And it has to be agreed by those EU member states. Can't be done. Too late. It arrived too late for any of that to possibly be done before the EU summit. However, the EU did say that they may be able to offer political support for it if they're in general agreement, but not legal approval. Now, it's also discovered, it's quite funny this, it was also discovered that Boris Johnson, his change to what is effectively May's deal is actually illegal in UK law. The notion of having a border up the Irish Sea is fine for agreement with the EU, it preserves the Good Friday Agreement, but it runs counter to the Taxation Act 2018 related to cross-border trade. So the new Conservative government, headed by Boris Johnson, has just spent months producing a single tweak to the deal that the previous Conservative government under May negotiated, which falls foul of a law that previous Conservative government enacted. The fail is magnificent, and it gets even better. The irony is that the part of the act it falls foul of is an amendment by Jacob Rees-Mogg, a senior member of Johnson's own government. It doesn't actually scupper the deal. The act, of course, Parliament can just amend or repeal it as necessary. So yeah, it doesn't actually mean the deal can't happen like that. But it was just quite amusing. But then, just finally, the little sting in the tail here. So there was another development with the Benn Act as well. And I saw not a wholly pleasant one. It's not necessarily disastrous, but it's not wholly pleasant. And it was confirmed by a couple of senior barristers. I say confirmed, suggested by a couple of senior barristers. So the situation before I read this, as far as I was concerned, is as follows. If Boris Johnson cannot get Parliament to vote for a deal by this Saturday or on this Saturday, then he has to send that extension letter off and we get our extension. Unless the EU didn't want to do it, but we don't get that impression, then we can breathe a sigh of relief. It's all sorted. Not quite. Not quite. So what the situation actually is, so if he hasn't had a deal voted for by Parliament on Saturday, he has to send the letter off. There's no doubt about that. That is just legally the case. To the point where the government are even now saying, yes, they'll absolutely send the letter off. They know they have to. They know they have to. However, let us say that he was to hold a vote early next week on a deal. Because remember, he hasn't now got time to get that deal approved. But let's say the EU did approve it, all nice and legal, and then he were to bring it to Parliament, let's say on Tuesday, and Parliament voted for it, he is allowed to withdraw that extension request. He can withdraw it. All right. So basically, he has more time than this Saturday. Now, because the extension request will have gone off, I'm hoping the EU has already discussed it and they've got their thing ready to go. I'm hoping they're going to come back with it really quickly. Boris Johnson will have 2 days to bring it before Parliament for them to vote on it. Once they've voted it through and it's in law, then that should be it. So once we've actually got the extension and Parliament has approved it, then that should be it. Obviously, withdrawing the extension request then is meaningless because it's in law. But it does mean Boris Johnson does have beyond the 19th of October. So another little wrinkle there, which I'd rather wasn't there. It just means that we can't breathe a sigh of relief at the end of Saturday. The no deal sword of Damocles still exists until we've definitely got the extension. So that's the take home from this. He does have beyond Saturday, but as soon as we get the extension, we should be okay. But of course, there is always that danger that enough people will vote for the deal. That being said, although it appears, yes, Johnson has got more time, he does still need a deal to be agreed by the EU and get support from his hardliners. And it has been difficult to see how any such deal could possibly emerge this year. I only thought that this might get through Parliament because what he'd really use it for is to get a no-deal Brexit. And the ERG and the DUP would be on board with that. But because the DUP and the ERG are sounding very cautious about this deal and saying they're not happy about it. That, to me, suggests that it's not going to be possible to get them to vote for it. So what I would say is the chances of Brexit still exist for this month, but it remains below 50%, albeit not far enough below 50% for comfort. But I would imagine Johnson may be, if he can't get the ERG on board, then he must have pretty much given up on leaving the EU this month now. He may feel he has an outside chance, but I would think he's going to now put all his efforts into winning a general election. He's obviously already been putting in a lot of effort to that anyway. The issue here, though, is that let's say he gains a majority. Now, that seems doubtful to me, but let's just say. That doesn't mean that his MPs will vote in favour of a no deal. Many of them will still be opposed to a no deal. And if the ERG still won't go for any form of deal that is acceptable to the wider EU, then that still means we can't leave with a deal either. So that means Boris Johnson, even with a majority, still won't be able to take us out of the EU under any circumstances. So you can see why his initial plan, blundered as it was to simply trample the law and the constitution in order to force us out. Because, yeah, even if he wins the general election, which will be truly awful, it's still not obvious how he's going to take us out of the EU. But anyway, that's my reading on today's events. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please click on the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.